Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. I am your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very, very accomplished tech entrepreneur from the US, currently sitting in Costa Rica, Mr. Sam Yilmaz. Sam, welcome to the show.
Hello, everybody.
Sam is the Chief Operating Officer and General Partner of a company called Bloccelerate, and he's a published author. So, Sam, let's talk first about Bloccelerate. Tell me a little bit about this venture.
Yeah, Bloccelerate is a Seattle-based venture fund. We find and invest in early-stage blockchain-powered initiatives. Our goal is to back driven entrepreneurs and with a focus of bringing blockchain to institutional and enterprise use cases.
Okay. And what was the motivation to start off a fund focused only on blockchain?
Well, so going back in time, I had a personal reason, which I was sort of bored in my full-time job, and was definitely looking for a way to get to the cutting edge. I was doing financial turnaround management in the Netherlands. That was after having been an entrepreneur, an angel investor, having run a first of its kind venture vehicle to invest in project tokens. And it was not as exciting to have moved into more of a conventional function and less involved with innovation. So besides the personal sentiment, there's also within that context a greater recognition that the workflows that I was having to deal with redesigning SAP, collections management, contract, so on. It's like, this is insane. How could it be that 3 to 5 parties can't agree on the status of an invoice, on the status of where assets and goods are?
Correct.
What the terms of the contract meant to each other. And I thought, we have to bring the two worlds together. All of what I was working on before and all the workflows that I'm looking to design and implement in the enterprises, there is such clear use for this consensus over the wire and enabling the different stakeholders to agree and see the same version of truth.
Fascinating.
So, and all of that was the impetus, the motivation, but came with the added benefit of now I get to meet the brightest minds and bring to market what was previously impossible, or make it significantly more possible and with lesser cost, less friction, and so on.
Fascinating. So before I go into any questions on the blockchain, for a lot of my viewers and listeners, help me understand what is a blockchain.
Okay. Yeah, I harped on the term consensus over the wire, so let's maybe expand on that a little bit. I found it to be a worthwhile metaphor in explaining it to people. If you think of emerging technologies over the course of history, where we had over-the-wire technologies that were game changers, right? So you had electricity, which was power over the wire.
Correct.
You had telephone, which was voice over the wire. You had internet, which was data over the wire. And now I see blockchain as consensus over the wire.
Wow.
And all of these technologies throughout the course of history and sort of the evolution of this technologies gave us greater sort of power at a distance, so to speak. Electricity, telephone, could not only turning lights on and off, but turning it on and off with a message carrying capacity, then turned to voice, then turned to data. Now, with the added benefit of having consensus over the wire is that not only do you declare something to the world, but you recognize that everybody else will see the same version of truth that was put on there. And that even if the raw data propagated isn't higher, at least not yet, the significance is higher because it means more. It means more when more people can agree to what the state of affairs is. And so I see blockchain as a sort of this social technology that enables all of us to self-assemble and communicate and agree on assets, identities, and workflows.
Amazing. You know, Sam, consensus over the wire is probably one of the best explanations I have heard.
I can't take full credit for it. It's a team effort.
Okay. But it is fascinating, and it's so easy to understand the moment you say it. Thank you for this explanation. So moving on, Sam, what is blockchain doing to increase transparency?
So what is it doing? In its technical details, it enables you to commit messages that when are mined or otherwise put on chain makes it immutable with some asterisks, and for viewers to be in a position to see what has happened in history, and also through looking at mempools, what's happening currently. And so that's the means of enhancing transparency, that if you have the viewership into what's happening on chain, you get a sense in a fairly granular manner of the activity that's unfolding.
Okay. And again, now from a viewer listener perspective, you know, blockchains are being talked by everybody. But I would love to understand from you, how can they be used by individuals, corporates, and for smart government?
Yeah. I think the division based on stakeholders is kind of secondary. What's primary is what will be necessary for blockchain use cases to take hold. In reality, independent of whether the user is individual, corporate, or government, we need to bring assets on chain. We need to bring powers of particular identities on chain, and we need to bring processes on chain. Now, when we speak about bringing assets on chain, we have this language around in our space, real world assets on chain. I kind of take issue with that. I feel like no asset is real, or there is no asset that is not real. So we have to kind of be very particular about that. Because what is an asset? Asset is a thing, whether it has a declared notional value or something digital backing it or something physical that backing it. It's a thing that has ownership associated to it. If you don't have ownership, then it's not really an asset. And ownership in and of itself is a completely social construct. So if we could say what social isn't real, then fine, let's call all assets are, social and not real. Or we have to say even the social, digital, and the physical assets are real, and they are of the world, and they are of the real world. But what we are trying to do is not bring the asset on chain most of the time, but the ownership and the rights around it. So another kind of important point around bringing assets on chain is that we've done a fairly good job bringing certain kinds of assets on chain compared to others.
Right.
That's because of what blockchain is. Remember how we were saying blockchain is consensus over the wire? Some assets are assets only because they are declared as such. We have instituted them. We have declared them to be a certain way, and therefore given them value.
Correct.
So we can say this contract has value because it's an options contract, and we have declared that it will function in such and such manner in the future. That's a declared asset on the spot. It has value in no other time before then the parties agreed to it having that value.
Correct.
And those kinds of assets are easy to put on chain because they can be born on chain. Instead of putting the asset on paper, we can put it on chain.
Mhm.
And then there are a second degree separated kinds of assets, which tie to digitally renderable services. So if I could have a digital experience, whether it's a virtual live concert or promise of computation, promise of data storage. If I was to put a gate, and this gated experience behind that paywall required you to have that token,
Right.
then that would be an asset that's tied into the digital service. And then further removed from that is what some people are referring to as the real world assets, but what is really being meant is these physical tie-in assets, the utility of which reside in the real world compared to the digital, compared to declared. And those already have ledgers, already have consensus means of keeping track of the ownership. So we could talk about your bag of apples and you have a receipt and invoice. We all have agreed that if you have the invoice, you are the owner. Or you've paid for it and you have proof of payment, you're the owner. You have a bank wire, you're the owner. Or your ownership is stored in a previously agreed on consensus ledger stored at the county and you're the owner of that property. These physical utility, but ownership, let's call it physical utility assets with ownership on some ledger or some consensus means of storing it. Those assets are hardest to put on chain and have proven to be relatively difficult to put on chain. And now we're working with sort of transmodulator means of taking the legacy ledgers, the invoices, the receipts, the county records, and putting them on chain so that the asset ownership can be documented on chain as well. So going back to your question, how will people use it? We've got to work out how to put assets on chain. Then we have powers and identities and how to put them on chain. We've done relatively good job in sort of conceiving of the means where groups of identities can, or a group of wallets can have multi-sig signing sessions to execute certain events inside a company or inside of governments, or even social wallets. If 5 of your friends agree that you're you, then your assets could be unlocked even at the individual level. So identities, we've done less good of a job bringing identities on chain than we have in bringing assets. But once you have these two components, assets and identities, and their powers on chain, then it's easy to conceive of bringing the processes on chain so that we can say, these people will agree, this is what will happen to these assets, and here is this immutable contract that stores that. Ultimately, this middle leg of identities on chain and the powers of participants on chain will need the incentive of successful processes. So it's kind of a bottleneck in bringing the processes alive, in bringing the workflows alive. But also, until such a time as we see these workflows, identities will also be relatively disincentivized to come on chain because it's not that easy when you're first doing it.
Very well said. So, from whatever I've been reading about the blockchain, I have a slight understanding now. Now I'm not an expert. It seems to be the ultimate answer to most of our problems. But my question to you, Sam, is that whenever there's something fantastic, there are vulnerabilities. I'd love to get a perspective from you. What are potentially the vulnerabilities or challenges of blockchain?
Okay, so as fantastic as it is, we have a lot of security challenges. Governing access to your own assets with private keys that may be relatively easily compromised or maybe complex to manage for a beginner is hard. Then reiterative development of applications is also proving to be relatively difficult. What other vulnerabilities can we speak of?
Would privacy be an issue for common people?
Privacy. Sure. The issue is, generally speaking, the synonymity, or the pseudonymity can be unlocked by tracking on-chain activity. You can pair certain activities with certain identities, and then downstream associate the later activity with a particular identity. And even though security is enhanced by having your transaction stored on a public chain with an open platform that incentivizes more nodes to come and do the service of keeping it, and you're given certainty that you can see it, everybody else can see it, and it will be there, privacy kind of takes the hit. And going forward, I think we'll address this vulnerability in a way, because we're working on multi-party computation, zero knowledge proofs, and enclave technologies that will enable privacy preserving but publicly recorded histories and transactions of particular activity. So take, for example, you're a company, you want to buy 300 of item A from my inventory. Okay, you don't want your identity to be known that you're you who's buying. I don't want even you to know that I have 1,000. All I just need to give you is, if the amount of inventory I have is equal to or greater than the amount you're requesting, then accept the transaction and record it on chain. And then if you need to see it, you can see it. If I need to see it, I can see it. If we needed to demonstrate to someone else, and if we both agreed, we could show it. In that instance, the multi-party computation and zero knowledge and sort of enclave technology would enable you to commit your transaction, and in the enclave environment, for example, that compute would run only if I have enough inventory to meet your request. Without me having shown to you that I have 1,000, without showing to you I have a particular item or anything else I might have, we have trusted a particular computation. We have trusted a particular enclave whose identity can be verified, and we can prove that certain means of running the computation is in fact what happened. So that will be, for example, one way to address the vulnerability. So it might not be as removed from the fantastic future as we envision.
Okay, well said. And one more question about blockchain, then I'll move to your book. I was speaking to several people, and most people say, how do we hold the blockchain accountable? You know, it's a series of transactions, packet data, one after another, like a railway train, bogies coming from all over and connecting one after another. How do you ensure that all the data that's going in is correct, and who's accountable?
Accountability. So you'd want to look at who has the power to propagate the transaction, and who will be the stakeholders that will need to use data. In the case of, say, Bitcoin or Ethereum, who is the stakeholder for transactions? Everybody who has a Bitcoin or Ethereum is a stakeholder in a given transaction. Whereas if you're looking at a particular transaction that you're sure only will ever involve, I don't believe in such claims, actually, but if you were certain that there will be a transaction that will only ever involve foreign stakeholders, then you could put that on chain and provide the right access to only those people who you want to keep accountable. So you could set up your own network, and everybody who has power to write a transaction will be brought into that network. And this is the model that has been attempted in private networks and private chains. And I think future is to be seen. I'm feeling that with privacy preserving but public chain compatible technologies like the ones I mentioned, these private network implementations will no longer be necessary, and accountability that private chains are looking for will be accomplishable at the public chains level as well, because we can, whitelist, we can confirm identities, we can make identities knowable in the event of X, Y, and Z events, and trigger more data availability upon particular events rather than making it publicly available all the time.
Very interesting. So Sam, let's now move to your book. You're a published author. Tell me about your book.
It is actually a book chapter in a completely unrelated domain.
Okay.
It was self-assembly methods in chemical engineering.
Okay.
It was a philosophical tie into what I'm doing, in a way, in that what we are trying to accomplish is a greater functionalization of individuals and building blocks of larger systems, so that the capabilities of any one player are extended out to give rise to emergent properties. And so that was sort of the same principle in self-assembling materials, where effectively you're engineering a building block and you expect it to function in a particular way downstream when it assembles with like parts. And then the phenomenon and the emergent behaviors are going to be completely different than what you could have expected one particular building block to be able to accomplish. So that was in a prior incarnation.
Okay, fair enough. So Sam, on that note, and on your comment of blockchains being consensus over the wire, I really want to say thank you so much for speaking to me. Thank you for talking to me about Bloccelerate, about explaining so simply how the blockchains are a major milestone in the world. And you gave very good examples of electricity and telephone and data over internet, and now this is consensus over the wire. So thank you for talking to me about that. Thank you for explaining in so much detail about various opportunities and challenges of blockchain. And thank you for everything that you're doing for such amazing technology. Good luck and all the best.
Yeah, thank you, Ashutosh. I appreciate you having me. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.